Brilliance Audio presents Debt of Honor by Christopher G. Nuttall, performed by Lauren Ezzo. That's all you could find? The two officers winced in unison, as if they expected to be marched to the airlock and unceremoniously thrown into space for failing to accomplish the impossible. Once, Admiral Zaskar acknowledged ruefully, they might have been right. Failure was a sign of God's displeasure, a proof that the failed, deserved to be punished. But if that was true, and he no longer believed it was so, what did that say about the theocracy? He studied the manifest on the datapad for a long moment, trying to hold back a tidal wave of depression. A few crates of Starship components, some so old they probably dated all the way back to the early days of spaceflight. Boxes of ration bars that were older than most of the men who were going to eat them. It was a far cry from the supplies they needed to keep the fleet alive. The squadron, really, was on the verge of breaking down completely. In truth, he'd started to lose faith in his ability to keep his ships and men together long enough for the enemy to give up the pursuit. And the asteroid base? He looked up at the officers. Were there any people who might be interested in joining us? No, Admiral, the older officer said. They refused our offers. And we can't make them a little more compulsory, Zaskar told himself. We'd be betrayed within the week. He cursed his former masters under his breath. His crew was composed of the ignorant and the fanatics. The only thing they could do was remove a broken component and slot in a replacement, which had worked fine until their supply lines were destroyed once and for all. Even the finest engineers in the fleet couldn't repair everything, let alone build new components from scratch. He'd had to cannibalize and abandon a dozen ships just to keep the rest of the squadron going, and he was all too aware that their time was running out. Go see the cleric for ritual cleansing, he ordered shortly, and then return to your duties. The two officers bowed, then retreated. Zaskar watched them go and tapped a command into his terminal. A holographic image snapped into existence, flickering slightly. Zaskar's eyes narrowed as he studied his fleet. The flicker was tiny, but it shouldn't have been there at all. A grim reminder of their predicament. The onboard datanet was glitched, and no one, not even their sole computer expert, had been able to fix it. His entire ship was breaking down. He wanted to believe that the handful of light codes in the display represented a powerful force. 4 super dreadnoughts, 9 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and a pair of courier boats. On paper, it was a powerful force. But one super dreadnought could neither fire missiles nor energize a beam, and ammunition was in short supply in any case, and 5 of the smaller ships were on their last legs. Each failure, small in itself, led to a cascading series of failures that simply could not be fixed. Zaskar rather suspected that the Commonwealth wouldn't need an entire super dreadnought squadron to wipe out his fleet in a stand-up battle. A single super dreadnought would be more than enough. Which is why we are here, he thought, switching to the near-space display. They won't come looking for us here, not until we are betrayed. He gritted his teeth in bitter rage. The asteroid settlement was the sort of place he would have destroyed if he'd stumbled across it before the war. Smugglers weren't allowed to operate within the theocracy, which hadn't stopped a number of high-ranking personnel from trading safety and political cover for items that they simply couldn't obtain anywhere else. And now, he swore angrily. The smugglers might be their only hope, if they could find something to trade. But the squadron had very little to offer the scum of the galaxy. Except ships, he reminded himself. And we're not that desperate, are we? Zaskar tapped the console, shutting off the display. He didn't want to admit it, even to himself, but perhaps they were that desperate. His fleet was dying, and its crew was dying too. Discipline was steadily breaking down. Internal security had logged everything from fights to a handful of unpopular officers being murdered in their bunks, and he didn't dare try to crack down. His crewmen were too ignorant for now to realize just how bad things really were, but he knew it was only a matter of time. The squadron was well on its way to collapsing into irrelevance. The Commonwealth wouldn't have to lift a finger to destroy them. They'd do that for themselves.